So let's start at the beginning. You got pregnant. Was it planned or was it a surprise?
This was definitely planned. In the year before, we decided to have a child at 34 years old. We'd had some pretty stressful times. We had a lot of things happen, and we'd lost loved ones, and we'd lost jobs, and all these things happened. And so it was pretty intense, but we decided that we would like to have our own family at that point. Before you get pregnant, there's a lot of things you hear. You shouldn't be having a baby after this age. You shouldn't be doing this or that. And so I gave it a little bit of thought, but I'm okay. I had already picked out my provider. I had a doctor with the hospital system that is closest to me. So they had just built the hospital with a birthing center pretty close by. It's about 20 minutes away. And so I thought, oh, that's perfect because it's close. Everything else is much farther. And the doctor that I had liked, who was far away, was coming to practice there. And I already knew her. And I thought, oh, that's a perfect match. I should be okay. And they have a level 2 NICU, and they had a practice of midwives there. So I thought, it'll be good. There will be a lot of ways for me to do this. One thing I did know was I wanted to have a C-section. It was very important to me. I wanted a little bit of control. I just didn't want to have the whole labor experience. I didn't feel like I needed that. So I went in with the idea that I would have a C-section, and the doctor felt it was reasonable for the different conditions I had. I would be over 35. I did end up with gestational diabetes. So it was an evidence-based plan at that point. But like every pregnancy, you're a wild card. You don't know what you're going to pull. And for me, I didn't have a lot of sickness. I didn't have a lot of nausea. I wasn't really very tired. I was intensely depressed. And I don't think that's taken seriously enough by anyone, even by providers. I think they kind of screen you. And I know one of the things that when I was trying to explain, look, I can barely function. I'm not myself. And they looked at me and they said, well, you took a shower, you washed your hair, you're dressed in clean clothes. You're probably okay. You need to just go and get a pedicure, go out to lunch, just go relax. And I said, no, I just, I don't feel like myself. But that wasn't a good enough answer for this provider. I don't know if I worded it incorrectly. I just don't think I had the words for them to understand. Something that I noticed is it felt like the most intense PMS I'd ever had in my life. But I wasn't feeling suicidal. I wasn't feeling like, the usual things are like, oh, well, you don't feel like this, or this. They named a lot of extreme things that I was not feeling. Some ways that I knew I was not myself, I was unable to focus. Couldn't do it. Didn't want to think about decorating a nursery. Didn't want to think about making dinner. I just wanted to lay there. I wasn't interested in doing anything fun like crafts or reading or anything. I just would stare at a wall. I couldn't sleep. I wouldn't be super anxious, but I just couldn't sleep. I'd just be at this level where I couldn't calm down. It turns out that 14 to 23% of pregnant people experience this. That's huge. So it needs to be talked about more. There are some really good resources, but they're on the internet. And when you're searching for things on the internet, you can find a lot of really bad information too, and a lot of things that aren't evidence-based. I would hope, as time keeps going on, and especially with more resources becoming available, that providers will have better screening tools, or they'll tune into it more, because it was brutal. Along with that depression, when I had the gestational diabetes, I was having to do testing a lot. I didn't end up going on insulin. My numbers were always fairly stable, but just the idea that, you can only eat a little bit of this, even if you're starved. I think that was the thing with pregnancy. It was like, I was so hungry all the time. I'm like, oh, I can't have anything I want. I did notice that if I couldn't eat the things that I really, like, I want really spicy food, I want a green apple. Well, you can't really have a lot of the, like, I like spicy noodles. You can't have those when you have this gestational diabetes. You can't eat a whole green apple. Like, I like the big green apples. That makes your blood sugar go up. So I couldn't eat the things that comforted me. So I had all that going on. I did see a nurse who specialized in diabetes care for pregnant people at the high risk OB that was next door to my OB. So it wasn't a trek to go to those appointments, but they would always be right before my regular prenatal appointments. And on top of that, I ended up having to do genetic counseling and testing. I have some risk factors. So there were a couple things that kind of came up wonky on my quad screening. So they said, well, let's just, let's take a look, let's see. And then I ended up doing a maternity 21 test. It is a blood test. It is still a screening test, because ultimately, if they find anything else to confirm it, they really would have to do an amniocentesis. But for me, they were able to get enough blood out of my teeny tiny little veins. That is not fun. Like, if you're dehydrated and you have bad veins to begin with, and they go and say, now we're going to take these 2 really big things of blood. And I'm like, oh, I don't have enough to give. So that was also kind of traumatic for me, because I ended up being very bruised. So I'm feeling out of it. Can't eat anything comforting. They're telling me, well, we don't know, but probably your baby's okay, but this test will help us determine what more we need to do to verify that baby's okay. So that was just a whole lot for me to be going through. And there were a lot of really well-meaning people in my life who made it so much worse. Oh my goodness. Like, I think when people want to comfort others, they still center on themselves, no matter what it is. And it's because it's what we're most comfortable with, ourselves. But people who wanted to tell me certain things, like, I didn't tell anyone I was going through that testing, because I'd heard all the crap that they'd said to me up until that point. I'm like, you are not comforting, can't share this with you. But one of the things someone was telling me was, oh, if you have a child with this syndrome, oh, they're so loving. You don't have to worry about that. Oh, it's such a wonderful experience. And it was not someone who had a child who was special. So I thought, well, I mean, it's different for everybody. Everyone's circumstances are different. But for me, the well-meaning people and who wanted to blame my providers, I was fortunate enough that I could have this testing done, that I could see providers who could talk to me about what could happen and also could help me and my baby if we did need treatment. But people were blaming the providers. Oh, they're stressing you out. You need to see a midwife. You need to see this. I remember, because what I had made me high risk. And one of my friends who'd always delivered with midwives, they were hospital-based midwives, but she was low risk for all of her pregnancies. Her husband's like, well, why don't you just see a midwife? I'm like, you're missing the point. That's a provider for low risk people, and I am not low risk. And seeing that provider would not make me low risk. So there was that. And then the people who are like, you need to take these herbs and that'll help control your gestational diabetes. And the other thing that made me very upset, especially when people found out that I was depressed, they'd be like, you have so much to be grateful for. And the other thing I heard a lot of was, oh, that's bad for the baby. It's bad for you. You got to snap out of it. This is bad for your baby. As if I didn't feel bad enough that I wasn't excited for this kid, that I didn't really care about decorating a nursery, and also birth plan. Never talk about your birth plan with people, because I always have unless it's a sandwich suggestion or they're telling you what meal they're going to bring you, you don't need to talk about your birth plan with anyone. You'll find a lot of people were saying for a birth plan, oh no, you don't want to do this, you don't want to do that. I looked to my provider and the many providers that I saw throughout my pregnancy, because I figured they were probably the best people to talk about, because they had my history and they knew, and they've seen many pregnant people. So their opinion comes from all the years of practice they were doing. something that I wish for everybody for their mental health is that they could see a provider specifically for mood disorders during and up to a year after their child is born. There is a doctor that is an OB who trained to be a psychiatrist too, because she saw a need, and she saw the need for pregnant and postpartum people to be heard and to be talked with and to be treated. Because depression and anxiety during pregnancy and after, that's a medical condition, and you deserve to get good care and not just, you'll be okay, the sun will come out tomorrow, you know. But with all that being said, I got up to 35 weeks, and that's when everything really started going sideways.
When all these new things were coming out, diabetes, all this stuff, now you're doing genetic testing, you're doing all these different things. Did this just add to your depression of everything? Because how did you feel? Did your expectations change? Did things change a little bit for you during that time? Because I mean, you're already kind of dealing with the depression side of stuff, and now you're digging into other, you know what I mean?
Definitely. It added to it. And what made it worse was there was no one for me to talk to about what I was going through except for my partner. And he was very stressed out at that time. He had a lot going on. And I felt bad. I felt very, very guilty that I was having all these feelings and all these complications. I felt terrible because it's kind of what he always figured would happen. And it was coming true. He's pretty intuitive. So, you know, he was definitely as supportive as anyone could be, especially with a birth plan, especially with a C-section. He had seen a lot of home births in his family. And he said, I don't want to go down that route. And I want you, his thing was he wanted me to be comfortable and not to hurt. And he wanted baby to be okay. But it was very stressful to be going through all these different things and not have supportive people around me and not to be able to share it because people would want to make it better and there just isn't a way to clear any of that. All you can do is be there for someone. And I didn't have that.
My question would be, I know you weren't getting the kind of support for your depression that you were hopeful that you could get from your providers. Did you have any problems with your providers outside of that, or were you good with that? So, I mean, was there any bright spots in your pregnancy?
You know what? I had awesome providers for everything else. They were amazing when it came to questions about why are we doing this testing? What is the plan of care now that we know I have diabetes? Like everything else I felt was very good care. Outside of that, I really liked, I saw quite a few providers, but I really enjoy going to see the diabetes nurses because they were specialists. It's all they did. They were right on point. And so any questions I had or just anything that came up, like I noticed for testing, my numbers were really high in the morning. Like they were expected them to be much higher. So I would say, well, is it because of this? Do you think before bedtime we should be doing this because you have to eat a certain way? Let's try that. Or, you know, just they knew what they were doing. It was amazing. And if they didn't have an answer, they would find out from either a colleague or they would look at what, you know, what's best practice. And then they would apply it to me. So I felt very safe delivering with that hospital system. All my providers could see everything in my chart. They just pull it up and be like, oh, yep, you went to this nurse, you go here. I loved them. Especially towards the end when I had to see, I went to triage a couple times because my blood pressure was high, and that hospitalist that I saw, they were amazing. They were incredibly supportive because I was very scared, and I just felt like, oh, we're good. I'm in good hands.
So in other words, your emotional problems had nothing to do with your providers. Your providers were good. Your emotional problems were completely separate from the care you were getting. And it was that extra something that it wasn't their job to deliver. And the screening could have been better, could have caught it. What you really, really needed was to be referred to somebody.
Exactly.
And that happened. I want to say one of the things that I keep on thinking about with pregnancy is the clock never stops ticking.
But yeah, my providers were awesome, and I wasn't expected to go and do research. I didn't have to read any books or just the handouts they would give me, very simple and to the point, because they knew they were the ones providing the care. And that helps. It was a group effort in that I brought my symptoms and I brought my concerns, but I didn't have to worry that I had to know something or that I was expected to also know what they know to ensure a safe pregnancy and birth. 34 weeks was where it started getting interesting. Our doctor always hands out a birth plan, right? At 33 and 34 weeks, it's 2 parts. One's like atmosphere. What do you want? Do you want the lights down low? Do you want music? It's like this nauseating list of things that you probably won't remember when a contraction hits, but they're awesome providers in that they want to make the experience good for you. And it was all these things. It's like, do you want the curtains open? Do you want them closed? And I was like, oh, no, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm having a C-section and I want my IV in my right arm. And so there was like a thing about that, because that's where they put the blood pressure cuffs. I know this needs to be in the left. And she's like, you've got a better vein there anyway, so we need to use that side. I'm like, cool, well, let's write that down. But my blood pressure was really high. And she said, I just want you to stay here for a while and we're going to observe you. And it could be just because my husband drove me to all my appointments because he wanted to be there. And oh my goodness, this is not the autostrada. This is not the Autobahn. We cannot drive like that. And I get really nervous when he drives. The way he drives, it's like California, but I would say it's worse. He's like your typical Orange County driver. So anyway, he drove like that and it did upset me. So I told her that. I said, I'm just upset. And she said, okay, well, maybe. So my blood pressure went back down. She said, but I want you to come in Sunday to be observed for a couple hours. She said, I'm overly cautious. She said, I'm also going to send you to the lab to get some blood work drawn because I'm overly cautious. And I thought, well, gosh, I don't want to be poked again, but whatever. So they screened all that blood. The blood pressure was going up. Sunday when I went back in, my blood pressure was still up. I saw a hospitalist and I went to the triage area. So it was so awesome. I go in, they know my name, they know why I'm there. They're like, put a hospital gown on, here's how the TV works, tune into something you like. Doctor will be here in a minute. He already knew everything about me. He knew my doctor because he's a hospitalist and he is there for shifts. He's there and he works with the other OBs. And so he just knew who it was. He's like, oh yeah, she's awesome. She's cautious. You're in good hands. Okay. So my blood pressure went back down again after I was laying there for 2 hours. And he said, you're going to have to rest some. This is a stretch where you're just going to have to kind of get through until 39 weeks. So I said, okay. So I went home, kind of dinked around, was definitely depressed. And then I woke up Tuesday morning and I had this great, awesome energy. I went grocery shopping. I did all this stuff and I felt so good. And it was my birthday, so I went out to dinner with a friend. And we had some pizza. And that's where the trouble started. Because no food is going to put you into labor. That's not true. It doesn't change your hormones. But we were having a discussion. She wanted to talk about a baby shower. She's like, I just want to do something for you. And I think it'd be nice to do that before. I said, well, I don't want to do that before. I don't want to do a baby shower before because one, I can't eat any cake and I really want to eat cake. What's the point of going to a baby shower if you're not going to eat the cake or the cupcakes? And I said, I can't take any of that right now. I said, it's too stressful for me because I couldn't enjoy it. And she's like, well, she said, I talked to your parents and they really want to be in on this and they want to do that before baby's born. And I said, no. So I got very upset. And I thought, yeah, I hadn't had Braxton Hicks for a couple weeks. And I remember talking to my provider about it and saying they stopped. And she said, well, as long as the baby's moving, he seems fine. But if you're concerned about movement, you can come in, but it's not really a thing to be concerned about if you don't have Braxton Hicks all the time. And I said, oh, I think it is. And she said, well, how long has it been? And I said, maybe, I don't know. I couldn't remember. So she said, it could be just, you're 35 weeks, give it some time, it'll pick up. So but I was having Braxton Hicks. I woke up the next morning. I felt like a truck hit me. I just couldn't get out of bed. And I wasn't having a lot of pain, but I just felt tight. And I felt like, oh, I'm having Braxton Hicks now. Why did I mention it? And it came back up. So my husband had already left for work. I was laying in bed and I got up to turn over, just kind of, and my water broke. And I was terrified. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a baby today. And I knew it. So I'm like, okay, go take a shower and do your hair. That was like the first thing. I didn't even call my husband. I don't know why. And so he calls me. He's like, hey, it looks like I have a full day of work. I'll see you later. I said, no, you won't. You need to come home right now. He said, why? I said, my water broke. And the first thing he said was, oh my gosh, do you think they'll still do a section for you? I said, maybe my water just broke and we'll still do things this way. So anyway, he came home and we drove to the hospital. And I remember the whole way trying to be really calm because I thought, well, I hope nothing is actually wrong because there could actually be something wrong. That's why my water broke. But I'm like, whatever, get to the hospital. And they know exactly who I am, of course, because they're like, oh, yep, that's you. Your water broke. Okay, yep, let's get you in this room. And the nurse is like, are you sure your water broke? I'm like, yeah, I definitely didn't pee the bed. So she tested. She goes, oh, yep, definitely. So the doctor came in and checked, and he's delivered thousands of babies, seen many, many, many pregnant people. And he looks at me and he said, okay, I want you to take a deep breath. He said, we're going to put you in a delivery room, but you're pretty much ready to go. I'm like, no. And I remember all hell broke loose at that point. There were like 6 people who came in. They were pushing the bed. They transferred me onto the bed in the delivery room, and people were trying to get IVs started and was trying to get monitors on me. And I felt like, oh no, this is not how I was supposed to do this. I said, I'm supposed to have a C-section. And he's like, well, he's like, you're right there. And I'm like, am I? He goes, then the baby's right there too. It was not what I had planned. And I was really terrified. And that's when I started just feeling all that pain. It's like it hit me. And they were trying to be so calm and so gentle with me because they knew I was scared. And I remember there were a lot of nurses that came in. The NICU team came in and they're like, we're just here for just in case, but you probably don't need us. And they hid behind a curtain. That time, I remember I was watching them and they pulled the screen so they couldn't see me. And my husband was terrified. His hands were so cold. And he's like, okay, I don't know. He's like, I don't know. Is baby going to be okay? And you could see baby was fine. There was one point where they turned me there was a sheet under me. So they went to pull it out. And I got back and I kind of scooted back and baby had a decel. And I remember I was trying to pull myself onto my side because I knew that's what I needed to do. And it scared me so much because I could hear that heart rate just going down. And the nurse was like, okay. She's like, stay there. Oh, okay. He's good. But it did take me a while for baby to actually be pushed out. I could not handle the pain. I was just thrashing around and screaming, and it's not easy to get your head around something like that, where you're giving birth and you're hurting and it's not how you planned it. So I have a lot of sympathy for people who have had a lot of trauma giving birth either way. If it's not what you plan, especially with pain and being worried, yeah, it's scary. So it took me a while to push him out, because I don't think my body was meant to give birth that way. I think I'm a person who's meant to have C-sections. It just turned out that I had a smaller baby that really broke my tailbone on their way out and tore me open a little bit. But he came out and he was okay, and he was okay to the point where they could hand him to me. My husband cut the cord, and that moment he just looked at me, and it's like he glared at me a little bit, but he was looking at me. And I thought, okay, is it going to be okay? But then I remember my husband cut the cord and they handed him to the NICU people, and he started screaming, like just, ah! And I don't think I had taken a deep breath since they had handed him to me. I'm like, oh, he's fine. Okay, baby's born. That's cool. In the middle of all this, my dad was calling me on the phone. And my husband, not thinking, hands me the phone. He's like, here, it's your dad. I'm like, are you really doing this right now? So I told him, I really don't want you to tell anyone, but we're at the hospital. I didn't mention the baby that was screaming in the background. And by the way, entertaining the whole NICU team, the nurse came over to me and she said, you've got to look at your kid. So I turned my head, look over at him, and he has his hands on either side of his head, and he's going with his hat. So she said, he hates the hat. I'm like, yay. And she's like, one less thing to worry about, right? I'm like, because it's January and it's cold. And I was like, he's going to need the hat. So she goes, oh, he's fine. And I'm like, yeah, he's great. So my dad's like, oh, okay, I won't say anything. But in the meantime, my dad tells my mom, who tells my brother, who tells the world on Facebook before I've gotten a chance that there's a baby there. My dad knew, because my husband told him when he took the phone from me. So I'm like, I'm dealing with that. These really unsupportive people, the birth of the baby before I got a chance. And I'm not feeling good. I was not planning to push and hurt and get sweaty and get stitched up and then have, you're traumatized already. And then they hand you this newborn who needs you, and they expect you to do this bonding time that they call the golden hour. So you're worn out, and not everyone needs this, but I needed space. I needed people to leave me alone and let me just process this huge thing that I've been through. Anyway, they put the baby in the gown with me, and they want me to hold baby, and then, just all this stuff. And I didn't feel like I had it in me to do that. I'm like, can't my husband hold the baby? They're like, no, bonding. Baby needs to be with you, and they need to breastfeed. And that was something that I had put on my birth plan. I'd like to try to breastfeed. I wasn't interested, oh, I have to do this. I just thought, well, I'll try it. My mom had done that with all of us kids. So I just figured, I'll try it too. Well, little mister really didn't have a lot of power to keep at that. So he'd get so tired and he'd fall asleep. But they said, if you bond with him, if you hold him, if you do all this stuff, then your milk will come in, it'll be great. And I was thinking, I'd just rather someone give him a bottle right now so I can just heal. I don't know what I thought I was going to do an hour after birth. I do remember that I was so glad he was born before Jeopardy, because I wanted to watch Jeopardy. That's my thing. It's the one thing I look forward to. And I'm like, good, everyone leave me alone, do whatever to the baby. I need to watch Jeopardy and feel like a human being again. So I was like, okay, I've been depressed during my pregnancy. I'm probably going to have really bad PPD. Like I remember telling the doctor this when he was stitching me up. I'm really scared. I'm going to be super depressed. And he's like, we'll help you. He's like, there's definitely a way we can help you. So I'm telling you, when I felt my tailbone give, that's when he finally was able to come out. But he did, yeah, he tore me pretty good. So I'm like, but I felt that. And I'm like, this is what I didn't want to have happen. Like, that's what I said. This didn't have to happen.
Next time, don't get the shower. Maybe that should be advice to people. When your water breaks, skip the shower, just go to the hospital.
Exactly. Just don't do your hair. It's going to end up messy anyway. But I was
epidural or hair, epidural or shower, epidural.
Get the epidural and become friends with the anesthesiologist. Like I had friends who told me these great stories about how they went. They had their epidural and then they were bored watching TV. I know there were people who were bored watching like a marathon of the Housewives, whatever, on Bravo. I'm like, really? It was that calm? She's like, oh, it was hours until I gave birth. But I was just watching the Housewives and I thought, that's awesome. I wish I had that. There was a lot going on during that birth. There was a lot going on.
And it happened so fast. And I mean, when I was, before I ever had kids, I heard about precipitous labors. They sounded pretty cool to me. It's certainly a shortcut. And then, yeah,
get it over and done with.
Yeah, no, C-section is the way to go if you want the shortcut. Trust me on that. Yeah, then the more people talked about their precipitous labors, I was like, no, never. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I did think, I was like, if I have to have one like that, I would just prefer that everything just go. I'm like, nah, like
only with an epidural.
So now. But that's another thing people actually tell me. Exactly. If it was like, or maybe even a chance to labor down some, that would have been preferable. I do have to say though, the provider that I delivered with was a hospitalist. He was older. He was awesome. I told him, and I think this is like me being me and totally out of it after birth. I said, when you retire, you should be a doula, because the way he just was able to tune into me and the way he talked to me and the way he helped, I'm like, that's what I needed. He was awesome, even though everything was just, for me, it was awful. The way he talked to me and the way he's like, okay, and the real gentle way about him, I'm like, okay, this is what everyone should have, even if they don't get the birth they want. I wish everyone could have a provider as cool as him, because he was just awesome. He just knew exactly, what to do. And he made me feel like, okay, wasn't great that it had to happen like this, but, we'll make the best of it. Kind of, he helped me. And I thought, oh my gosh, I wanted to name my child after him. I didn't, but he was good. And he helped my partner too, because I think it was really scary for my partner to have that, because my partner had only ever seen home births and just screaming and scary. And I think having a doctor be like, okay, this is supposed to happen, or this is how it's going to happen, and we're going to do this while they're working, was like, oh, thank you. Thank you for caring about my partner. And thank you for caring about me, because it made a huge difference.